largest octagonal house in the USA. Howard Nutt, a very wealthy plantation owner who owned plantations in both Louisiana and Mississippi, with his primary home being in Newellton, Louisiana, called Winter Quarters, purchased this property in 1850 as a surprise gift for his wife. Julia had grown up on this side of the river, played here as a child, expressed a desire to live here and raise her children here, prompted her husband to buy the 90 acres of land and put a colonial-style house for $12,000. They tore down the colonial-style house to make room for this house. They contracted with Samuel Sloan, a Philadelphia architect, to draw up the plans and to build this house for them, which is called an Oriental Villa and was not to have exceeded $75,000. But at the time the workmen left, they already had 80 in it. Took about 10 years to work out all the details, to get the materials together. The bricks were made on site. When the workmen came from the north, there was 750,000 bricks waiting. Took over a million to build a house. The lumber was secured locally. The woodwork that could be pre-made was made in Philadelphia and shipped down here. 1860, they had virtually everything they needed except some of the glass to build this house. The workmen came, went to work, were here approximately 18 months before the word came that the war had begun between the states. Fearing for their lives, they threw down their tools where they stood, collected their pay, and went home. But in that 18 months, they finished this floor, which is the basement of the house and the only completed floor of 6. They finished the outside shell of the building, the roof, the dome, and the finial on the top. Howard Nutt, thinking the war wouldn't last very long, moved his family into this floor to wait out the war. The plantation owners were Union sympathizers, even though they were the Southerners and they owned the plantations and the slaves. Their wealth came from the North. That's where their loyalties were. They were given protection papers by the Union Army that was supposed to protect all their assets from harm in this war. Well, needless to say, these were not honored because the soldiers had to have provisions, accommodations, materials, and they took them from where they could get them. They ended up burning all of his cotton, destroying all of his equipment, his cotton gins, most of the buildings on his winter quarters house, except the main house, which they occupied, but they did leave it standing, and it is still on tour today. Purchased as a small boy by Howard Nutt's father as a playmate for Howard Nutt. They grew up together. He served Howard Nutt as a manservant until Howard Nutt's death, at which time he remained with the family as a free man until his death. He is said to be buried in the Longwood cemetery with the family, and he's one of 2 slaves of record who was so highly regarded by his owners they commissioned his portrait to be done in oils. The picture on the wall over here is the second youngest son. His name is Calvin Nutt. He's in his early 40s here. He was in the mercantile business. He died about 10 years after this picture was painted by his own hand. I understand that he had a gambling and drinking problem, his business was failing, and his wife was leaving him. One thing about Natchez, we have 30-something antebellum homes here, and the biggest part of them are still owned by descendants of the original owners.